The Wandering Scholar thing seems an act. It's always an act with the sages, always pretending to know less than they really do. I'm sure he's got thousands of reasons for why he's not like them or trustworthy, blah blah blah, but I know his type, so I don't trust him. That's high praise coming from you. I'm going to take this stab and repeatedly jam it into your backside until you prolapse. Just like that, balance is restored to all known existence. You had me worried there. Let's change the subject.
What is it you...
I think that's it for her, and so let's talk to Lantry.
At least in theory, I'm supposed to be observing history and not getting myself wrapped into it. All the same, this is the thrill of a lifetime. Rarely does one stand so close to monumental moments in the making. You're playing a very dangerous game, or maybe toying with your food. By adopting the Vendrian God, you've bloodied the waters with the chum of hope. I must ask, did you help the Oathbreakers to suit your own plans and whims, or do you genuinely wish to protect them?
They're playing a dangerous game by talking. Did you help the Oathbreakers to suit your own plans and whims, or did you genuinely wish to protect them? If I were sympathetic to the Oathbreakers, I wouldn't say it to someone with the habit of recording me.
Point taken. I will make no note of the subject for the time being. And what of their past actions against Kairos? Aren't you worried of guilt by association? We saw what became of Karen for merely suggesting treachery.
Their service to me is atonement for past transgressions. I will waste no time on talk of bygones.
We long held to the fantasy that someone would rally to our cause, but we assumed it would be our neighbors and cousins that rescued us from extinction. I'd never have guessed salvation would come from the enemy's court.
Thank you.
Whatever you do next, consider that many eyes will be upon you, for you have both delivered and taken away the Overlord's edicts, and few will know how to make sense of the latter. You are an exception the Archons cannot afford to ignore. They will likely aim to control or destroy you.
Have you heard of edicts being broken before?
Most of Kairos' edicts were either worded to end in a manner of the Overlord's choosing, or the edicts have simply continued in perpetuity. That's not to say there haven't been stories of broken edicts. They're just uncommon. The oldest is, I think, Goldbraith and the Edict of Sorrows, and that tale dates back to around the year 110. Aside from you, the most recent was the Edict of Twisting Grasses, back in 380. In all these stories, Kairos' edict very clearly gives its victim a single way to escape, and someone manages it. What's never happened is the pure abatement of an edict, like using a spell of warding or cancellation.
Give me a moment, let's talk further. Let's discuss our current matters.
Of course. How can I help?
You were taking lots of notes. What's about? What about?
All kinds of things. My mind is old, memory's a sieve. Keeping track of you, noting what I hear of the war, scribbling down reminders to myself, that sort of thing.
You spying on me?
Yes. If I'm worth my weight in tin as a craftsman of record, future generations will know of you. So yes, the Archon of Posterity sent me. You seem troubled by something that ought to be an honor.
Is it safe to be writing on your arms that
No,
much?
certainly not. But it depends on the ink I'm using. Too much cerulean and I can't sleep. But just the right amount, and I can write all night. The red ink will give you swamp bottom if you drink it, but absorbed through the skin, it'll make you taste colors and smell music. Speaking of which, I should change out my tip. I use 3 kinds: sepia, cerulean, and a red that's never the same shade. my recipe needs work. I like having 3 colors, but they also provide different states of mind for writing.
Your rings sound like fun. Can I try
No.
them?
Oh, no. I'm trying to observe you. Corroding your mind is not part of the plan.
Let's speak of something else. I have some questions.
I am nothing if not a semi-reliable font of knowledge. What did you want to discuss?
I'd like to know more about you. Me? Well, fine, but I'm not a very fascinating subject. I study interesting people, enough to know I'm not one of them. What's the story? Tell me the origins of Lantry. Someday, someone half your age will ask you to sum up your life, and you'll realize what an arduous request that is. Well, where to start? I grew up in Sunder. I was born right after the independence from this realm of stalwart. So yeah, do the math and you realize I'm old. In a treaty that ended with a firm stipulation that Sunder chose to leave and Stalwart did not lose a civil war, the free city of Sunder marks 347 TR as its year of independence. He's pretty spry for 84. My parents were in harbor hands. My mother never returned from a voyage. My father lost his hand to infection and decided to sell me to the School of Ink and Quills. Any other family? Irrelevant. If they exist, they are strangers. Family ties are severed when joining with sages, at least in principle. The school has had its fair share of favoritism for blood relatives. As a novice, I was signed to the Devocodes when I learned to raise and groom birds to carry missives. And most of my early tomes are on the subject. 10 years and several tomes later, I decided I was ready to be welcome into the... Someone decided I was ready to be welcome into the inner circle and shown the ways of magic. And since then, I spent a great deal of time in the field study, which I suppose readied me for life after the fall of the Vellum Citadel. Well, as much as anything could really ready one for the strangest of these days. The Vellum Citadel was a library fortress, the largest archive of the written word and tears. The School of Ink and Quill protected and maintained the archive of ancient lore for centuries, standing apart from the political upheavals of the younger realms as an enduring pillar of knowledge and culture. Were you born Lantry, or did you take that name upon joining the School of Ink and Quill? Most sages take a new name when they join the school, but for me, the transition was difficult at first. I stuck to my old commoner name, and then just never got around to picking some high Fileton name like Sage Apophysis or Sage Dangling Participle. Is this your true scheme? Did you always want to be a sage? I cannot imagine doing anything different. I suppose in my youngest days I yearned for battle and glory like most boys I knew. Having now seen how short a soldier's life can be, I look back on that old calling and that mindset and laugh. So really, what's your story? What do you mean by that? I know you're smarter than your act. Extend me the same courtesy. Lantry smokes his beard, leaving specks of sepia among his white whiskers. I was on the take from Voices of Narat, or at least an agent of his sent to the School of Ink and Quill 30 years back. It'd be years later until I made the connection to the Archon. Most of the people think the war began 3 years ago, but the Voices of Narat had his hands in things sooner than that. I was part of that early invasion, and he was happy to accept a 30-year assignment that comes with an education. So you advocating to surrender to Kairos was the end of your long plan? Yes and no. When I first left, I was just happy to be getting educated by the sages on someone else's rings, and my orders were simply to listen and report. As time drew near, my commands were to win them over, a little at a time, to the notion of surrender. But I failed. The elders of the school grew defiant, and the militant minds won out. These are tearsmen after all. I didn't deliver the surrender, and it took the Overlord's edict to end what I was sent to do. Thank you for telling me. Now, no more secrets, understood? I will endeavor to earn your trust as best I can. Sorry to have given you reason to doubt. What else are you telling me? Well, I should admit, I have been taking an interest in your history since I learned about your proclamation of the Edict of Storms. In truth, I am deeply curious about anyone who lived as a vessel to Kairos' most supreme magic. When I heard you were proclaiming a second edict, I had to find a way for us to meet. Being tied up in a prison camp was not the intended plan. Let's speak of something else. How do you feel about Kairos? How can I not help but find him to be the most captivating person alive? The man has bent empires, claimed continents. Where he goes, history follows. I won't deny he has killed millions at least, but I contend more would have died in petty wars across Terratus and the void of Kairos. I've seen what tiny despots, merchant cabals, and mage guilds conflict in the name of all sorts of righteous causes. I will take the rule of Kairos over the tyranny of every other idiot in Terratus. Let's speak of something else.
If not a semi-reliable font of knowledge. What did you want to discuss?
I wish to discuss arcane matters.
And I'd be happy to oblige. Ever since the fall of the Vellum Citadel, it is hard to find someone with whom I can discuss such things.
What do you know of Kairos' edicts? Kairos has cast many over the ages, and to my knowledge, has never worded two edicts exactly the same. Edicts defy our understanding of magic. Kairos' magic works over vast instances over indefinite durations, and no archon or mere mage can counter the force of an edict. What can you tell me about edicts in general? I'll explain it to my students like this. A spell is to an edict as a drop of rain is to a hurricane. Edicts and spells are both magical cantrips, but differ in intensity by orders of magnitude. Edicts are almost commands to Terratus that must be carried out until the instruction allows for the magic to end. If Kairos wants a plague until next Judge's Day, expect copious buboes until next Judge's Day. Nothing has ever dispelled an edict, nothing outside the edict's own sunset clause, as I like to think of them. I'm curious about a specific edict. Of course, ask away. Any thoughts on the Edict of Execution on Vendrian's Alley? It seems like the Archons were about to kill each other, and the threat of mutual destruction was about all Kairos had left. I imagine fear is the only way to get someone like the Voices to follow orders, and the Edict certainly did whip them into action. Of course. What do you think of the Edict of Stone? The Edict of Stone ravaged the realm of SWTOR. The upheaval of earth and rock turned rolling plains into craggy steppe as known as the Stone Sea. Since the edict was directed at the traitorous Archon of Stone, it would have seen the upheaval of Xur as a secondary consequence. Though I imagine little of what Kairos does is unintentional. What about the Edict of Fire? I was there when the ground erupted with fire, and I don't think I remember ever being as terrified as I was that day. If I hadn't woken early, I would likely perish in my sleep or awoken to the experience of being immolated. I have very conflicted feelings about this matter. The School of Ink and Quill had every opportunity to surrender. The leadership chose to stand against the most powerful force on Terratus. While this is all very terrible, it was indeed very preventable. It was entirely preventable. You think me as crazy, but there is a part of me saddened I lived through an Edict of Fire. Kairos has used this before, and I figure I'm going to have years taken off my life fleeing an edict. Would have been nice if it were a historical first. What about an Edict of Storms? Tell me about the Edict of Storms. I would think you know more than most on the subject. I watched with great interest when it happened, but fleeing the Edict of Fire was a more pressing concern. The Edict of Storms turned the once forested land of SWTOR into the wind-swept wasteland. They call it the Blade Grave now, since only iron and bronze armaments remains. Hurricanes breeze, winds rust, and relentless lightning have destroyed the housing and farmlands. Let's speak of something else. Do edicts work on the same arcane principles as spellcraft and other magic?
Edicts are the strongest manifestation of magic we know, and they seem to violate all other lesser phenomena. No dispel cantrip has ever dented or abated an edict. Even archons with powers of great durability cannot shrug off their effects. Just look at Cairn. Now, what I find curious, edicts can flex a little. Or so my studies suggest this is the case. Take the Edict of Storms. While the day it was proclaimed was the most violent, the actual radius of the storm has changed over time. But most will have none of my hypotheses on this matter.
Fine, I'll take the bit. What's your conjecture about edicts?
So, in my studies, some edicts resolve some problem of the overlords and then vanish into history. But The edicts that linger around, almost all of them begin to widen. Their effects become more intense. Here's the intriguing part. The older the edict, and the more that's written about, the more the reports of that edict get more dire over time.
Perhaps edicts have a own life of their own once set in motion.
Something to that effect. I contend that edicts are powered by fear. Fear of Kairos helps fuel the casting, and fear of the edict feeds the magic, sustaining it, and if enough people fear it, even growing it a bit.
Rule by fear is certainly Kairos' way.
Intellectual honesty demands that I study the matter more. If I'm correct, the more people fear and obsess over an edict, the stronger it becomes. Anyway, another study for another time.
Let's speak of something
I'd be
else.
happy to oblige. Ever since the fall of the Vellum Citadel, it is hard to find someone with whom I can
What do you
discuss
know
such things.
of the magic of the Archons? I've studied many Archons over the years. Compared to the other sages, I'm an expert on the subject, which is sad because I feel like I've still much to learn. How does the magic of Archons work? The Archons have all magical powers that are intuitive. When the Voices pulls out someone's mind or Graven Ash protects his soldiers, that magic isn't a signed spell or ritual. To them, it's closer to flexing one's hand. The Archons are, what's the word for it? Axiom of magic, the root of magic, spell pioneers. I'm sure the analogy is off in many ways, but I see the Archons as mother of original magic and everyone else is imitating them. While every guild or school of magic will ascribe a different name to the theory, all mages inevitably stumble upon the unescapable fact only the Archons can will magic into being. Everyone else can only cast magic by invoking the sigil of an Archon that has come before. None know how the Archons do their magic. It seems to be different with each Archon, but the theory suggests that once an Archon starts to invoke their powers, anyone else who comes after that Archon could, with the proper knowledge, tap into the power with the proper sigil and know-how. This absurd law has given rise to the common question from young students. Could one guess at a sigil of an Archon not yet born, or not remembered by history, or simply unknown to the caster, and successfully cast a spell? Experienced mystics would tell you this is impossible, for they know that it is not enough just to mimic the gestures of a sigil. One must have willful conscious knowledge of the Archon and the intended power of being channeled. To confuse things a bit, some Archons learn to cast other spells in the same fashion as us lesser mages. If you aren't important as an Archon, you learn quick that all knowledge is power. I've studied many of the Archons for many years. Compared to other sages, I'm an expert on the subject, which is, Are all Archons loyal to Kairos? Officially, yes. In actuality, no. Those with true gift for magic always come to the attention of Kairos. A few manage to evade for a bit. The School of Tides is founded by one such uncontrollable, but these histories are exceptions. Occult Jade, Archon of Tides, never bowed to Kairos, and as said, she survived the assassin since the silencer. It makes her flight from Kairos before the war all the more troubling. We knew her as a symbol of strength when threatened, but when threatened, her weaker nature won. When we write biographies of the Archons, we refer to them as exarchs in their former years before stepping into their prime, but officially Kairos is supposed to grant all titles of Archons. It's quite the faux pas to self-appellate. Exactly why Jade insisted on calling herself Archon of Tides. She did not need Kairos' approval to wear the title she deserves, and I know she loved the fact that doing so must have annoyed Kairos. How is an Archon born or bred? I think we all dream of one day waking up and being an Archon. Given some of the madmen and loons that have exhibited mystical greatness, it can seem unfair the rest of us can't do it. I can say with confidence Archons aren't born, they become. Graven Ash is a good study of this. Before he was the Archon of War, he was a successful commander, each victory more daring and glorious than the next. Somewhere along the way, his leadership took mystical qualities. Graven Ash we know today can reach out and protect his soldiers from harm, but maybe at first he could just protect those near him. I wouldn't know for certain, But all will attest that he didn't have this power his whole life. Let's speak of something
And I'd
else.
be happy to oblige. Ever since the fall,
What do you know of
I've
spellcraft?
forgotten more than most blood chanters have ever learned. What do you want to know?
Can you teach me anything?
Most certainly. I probably should have shown you how to mend wounds sooner. If you have a moment, I can show you the healing sigil I was trained to use.
No time like the present. Rummaging through his satchel, the sigil produces a long quill and crumpled piece of parchment. With 7 quick strokes of the quill, he inks a pattern onto a page. We'll start with principles. When mending wounds and easing pain, we invoke the magic of the orphan midwife, Archara Rebirth. By invoking her sigil, we channel her mastery, however briefly, through our hands. Now trace the sigil in the following lines in the order I sketch him. Follow his instructions. Since this isn't your first cantrip, I'll move a little quickly, but I think you can keep up. And so if you need to heal pain as opposed to purge an infection, you need to move your hand like so, but you know, that's enough for now. The rest you can figure out on your own. What sort of magic did the sages teach you? Sage Sin didn't tutor me in the traditional sigils. Those are preservation, concealment, and healing, as derived from the bygone archon of Tharavis, Fading Wrath, and the Orphan Midwife. The preservation of magic is largely functional, sealing parchment, binding books, all that sort of thing. All of us chroniclers learn concealment magic, as our ideal method would be to study events without contaminating the decisions being made. As for the healing magics, many of us modern sages study this a great deal. This school has a shoddy reputation among the common folk. I figured if they knew us as healers and caregivers, maybe we start to change the opinion. Healing, that's a noble... So you study magic to spy on people? You can call it spying. I call it studying a subject without inducing causative elements. But I suppose, yes, my magic is useful for doing stealthy sorts of things one expects a spy to do. Way to make it sound so tawdy. What can you tell me about signing magic? Scholars don't have a good word for what archons do when they cast magic. Couldn't tell you how Graven Ash casts his protection, nor would I know how Bled and Mark consciously decides to move through her shadow. Bled and Mark is Kairos' knife in the shadows, the unseen drop of poison that enforces the Overlord's will. He reports to Tunon the Adjudicator, serving in his capacity as the final word to those who loathe Kairos' law and contempt. Few know the origin of the Archon of Shadows, or how Kairos maintains a hold on him. For those who anger the Archon never live long past sunset. But when us mere mages want to cast a spell, we do so by signing the sigil of an Archon that previously discovered the magical phenomenon in question. It is debated whether Archons create magic or discover magic that is waiting for us, but such questions seem impossible to answer while sober. That's all for now.
One moment, my friend. Just let me finish this thought.
So what's on your mind?
I
Have some
am nothing
questions?
if not a semi-reliable font of knowledge.
The same mages know all sorts of
I know
things.
everything, except for who's been saying that. What's on your mind?
Could you teach me something about history?
I'm flattered you think me that wise, but unless you are enthralled by migration observations and titillated by triangle ratios, I think I'd bore you silly.
But what better than tangent
Fine,
triangles?
fine. If you have truly nothing better to do than talk trivia with old Landry, so be it. A Brief History of the Tears by Sage Landry. Volume 1, Settlers from the East. Dry land, came the cry from the prow of the ship. After months in the deep ocean, the pioneers of the Tears saw their promised land at long last.
Fascinating.
Volume 3, years 90 to 94. If you thought 88 was a crazy time when everything changed, wait until 91.
Really? Do go on.
Well, if you enjoyed that, you're going to love Ratios of the Sun. So, by using the shadow of a staff at noon as a starting point, I used triangles to show a relation.
I need to read what this said. Haunting memories of Tunon's lectures creep into your mind. Unlike Toon, Unlantry cannot kill you for walking out of a lecture. Unlike Toon, Unlantry has to sleep. You've experienced worse. But what were your two measures far enough to derive a parallax?
I knew someone would ask that. And yes, so here's my proof. Sage winding script shows a relationship between all half-square triangles. I have a diagram somewhere.
So if that's correct, you could estimate almost any length from a known angle.
Yes. Way to steal the concluding reveal from me. But yeah, that's about the gist of it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think my voice needs rest. Thank you for the rousing conversation. One moment. I
have some questions.
Not a semi-reliable font of knowledge.
This ain't age, sages know all sort of things.
I know everything, except for who's been saying that. Oh,
Teach me
I
about
think
his-
I've managed to bore even me. I'm all out.
Know anything about the Bane? Our same sage cloven clause was reduced to a pile of ash. Man knew all there was to be written on that subject. Most of what we know is summed up by name. The full term for them is Mage Bane, and there's good reason for it. They'll prey on anything that moves, but show favoritism towards magically active humans. Tell me about wisps. Wisps are largely inconsequential by themselves. Hardly the menace mostly associated with the Bane, but these little glowing creatures often fall in the wake of scourges or other larger Bane. And that can make them a real danger. What do you know of scourges? Writhing masses of sharpened limbs and quiet as shadows. Scourges are the most frequently observed type of Bane. Not sure that the most numerous or just most likely to attack. Tell me about Havocs. Havocs are notable for being territorial. By all accounts, they stick to a chosen location and lurk. If you see one, common wisdom is to run. It'll give up chase eventually, when you find the edge of its home. And know anything about malices? Most troublesome of the magic banes are malices. Though I never experienced it, I'm told a malice can take hold of your waking self, leave you trapped in a dream while it puppets you. These evidence of these creatures didn't predate Cryos. I think the Overlord is the only powerful creature and cruel enough to breed one. You know where these creatures come from? They seem to breed in old walls, or at least that's where they exist in the highest concentration. But there seems to be no social interaction amongst Bane, or no logical mechanism, grinding their privates to make little Banes. Let's see something else.
I know everything.
Beastmen.
My knowledge is largely academic, not to be mistaken for practical.
Know the origins?
The earliest settlers made note of the Beastmen, so they were here before us, but not before the older realms. By all accounts, the tribes do not have record of a time before the Old Walls. So, the logical conclusion is that they arrived after the Old Realms, but before Five Wives.
What about the tribe? What of the tribes?
There have been thousands of tribes throughout history. Most dissolve within a Acquireman's lifespan. The stronger females branch off and make their own tribes with tougher names. Then the King of Azure rounds you up and puts you to work. The Stone Stalkers are the most powerful of remaining tribes, thriving now that Azure has fallen. As for the rest, the old Talons of Frozen Cloud, the Trollhooks, the Kolakar, the Katvanas, the Jaw Snap, all gone, I think. And then there's the Shadow Hunters. They're all but extinct.
What do you know are the minds and mannerisms?
They are true to their names and live like beasts. Clothing and artifice seem to have little value to them, whereas rutting and killing are the reason they wake in the morning. But it would be a mistake to think them stupid. Ask any tamer and they'll tell you some stories of their cunning. The beasts are wanting in patience and diplomacy, but they are a clever bunch.
Where do their loyalties rest?
You'd want to ask the authority, Sage Quillborn. She lived with the Kolakar for a few span back in 404. Some truly fascinating findings. She noted that every successful tribe has a singular female leader. It's Prima. She noted that beastmen show fluid loyalty to new matrons. They adapt well to changing leaders, but they never change the relatively simple but strict hierarchical model. Few beastmen have accepted fealty to Kairos. It would seem the notion of bowing to a person you have not seen in the flesh is insanity. This inability to bow to the Overlord will no doubt doom the species, for Kairos does not suffer such token insults.
Let's speak of something else.
I am nothing if not a semi-reliable font of knowledge. Well, You might want to ask a more soldierly type about the armies, but do you want to talk about the Archons or other mages?
The Archons. Tell me about Graven Ash.
Ash has served with Kairos for a mere century, but he has been a reliable general and level-headed warlord. Certainly when compared to some of the more bloodthirsty Archons to serve under Kairos. I'm not saying the disfavored are merciful. I'm just saying I've read the stories of the Archon of Blood and know it could be worse. I know Graven Ash can defend his soldiers from far away. Ash's Aegis is the term us Arcanophiles have taken to calling it. Not surprisingly, Graven Ash is beloved by his troops. I mean, if Tunon could mystically protect you from cudgels and sharp sticks from leagues away, you'd like him more.
True. Tell me about the voices. Oh, you don't have it written up. The voices is one of Kairos' most dangerous and unpredictable servants. He can pull memories, whole personalities, if you believe some reports from his victims. Over time, this has created a single Archon with the knowledge of countless lifetimes. He and I were in written contact as part of the taking of the Vellum Citadel. Though I exchanged very few words with him, it was readily apparent that the voices didn't see people, he sees uses. I know much of such luminaries, so I'm careful with my words, but ask if you must. What do you know of Tunon? Firstly, I should ask what you know of him. He is true to his core mission. He is fair and just. Fair and just by your measure, that is. Tunon, Archon of Justice, exists in texts spanning back hundreds of years. I cannot know how he came to be Overlord's adjudicator. Maybe you know that one, but he oversaw the conquest of the Tundra Sovereigns and they bowed to Kairos in the year 83. Do you know anything about Blood and Mark? Very little. His name is not printed in many texts. I know that he is sworn to Tunon and acts as his assassin. I know that he goes back a long way though. I've assumed he served Kairos about as long as Tunon, or give or take. What of Ciri, Archon of Sounds?
Not the youngest Archon in history, but certainly one of the younger, and history has yet to write much about her. And if I happen to be the first to write about her, well, that will look nice for my legacy.
Did you know Karn, Archon of Stone? Of him, I know very little. I believe he was the wild man of the hills that Graven Ash subdued in 402. But only one source suggests that link. He was famous for being, well, a big sour jerk. Seems he let his mouth run off about Kairos, and that was the end of his story. Let's speak of something else.
I am nothing if not a semi-reliable font. Well, you might want to ask...
What can you tell me about Mage Guilds? What do you know of the Earthshakers? It takes a strange bird to wish to emulate an Archon of Stone, but what do I do? What do I know? A whole cult sprang up to worship the man. This cult became known as the Earthshakers Guild, and even their weak imitations of his magic can fill the land with tremors. Karn answered to Graven Ash, meaning the Earthshakers are military allies of this favor. At least that's how it is, or was. Karn's treachery demanded retribution from Kairos, and this destroyed the reputation of the Earthshaker Guild. Many assume a traitorous teacher would breed traitorous disciples. What about the Forgebound? The Forgebound are a guild from the Northern Empire. Their magic is a bit different from the sigils you or I know. They are a slower, more rigid style of magic, and they used to become one with the forging of their tools. The Forgebound know the secret of turning gray rock into fine iron, and none have yet replicated this feat of craftsmanship. What they do is truly unique. They teach their craft by practice and lecture. Little of it is written down. Bloodchanters? Bloodchanters are a motley. To call them a propagate insults all other traditions. Most of their number were members of the School of Wild Wrath, but sold their loyalty to the voices of Narat. The Bloodchanters Guild, their personal mage cabal, blah blah blah. They brought with them their fire magic, adopted from the long-dead Thousand Embers Archon of Fire. Guess it's of little surprise that fire mages would find a welcome home in the chorus. But fire is now one of their tricks. The real tricks is their magic of passion, frenzy, and fear. Such magic is based on the sigil of Siren, Archon of Song. Are the other guilds in the tiers? The big three, Ink Tide Wrath, pushed out most of the other schools ages ago. History makes note of the Cutters, the School of Flowering Winter, and a few others did not survive the little wars our schools would wage. But I did little on those footnote schools. Speak of something
Well,
else.
Well, I am nothing if not a
What are you going to tell me about the School of Ink
You
and
mean what's
Quill?
left of them? What would you like to know?
What is the core philosophy of the School of Ink and Quill?
The sages are archivists, academicians, and arcanists. Our mission is to preserve the knowledge of today for the good of tomorrow. Though we are known for our magic, few realize that most sages concern themselves with scribal work. Only a select few have the talent or focus to work the sigils. Each sage benefited from the scrolls of learning that came before him, and so each sage must repay this boon by gathering, authoring, or translating new texts to the stacks. But all that's a bit generous. It's no secret that the sages were far more happy to add knowledge than to share it.
Why did the sages resist Kairos?
Why, indeed. As historians, it is our place to document, not direct. Let others rage and resist. Ours is the duty to record. The decision to defy Kairos was not unanimous, nor one decided upon lightly. The laws of Kairos would forbid much of the knowledge contained in the Vellum Citadel. The elder sages feared, rightly perhaps, that the Overlord would put an end to our tradition of stockpiling knowledge. The Battle of the Vellum Citadel was a battle to preserve knowledge, but our actions will be remembered as treason against the will of Kairos.
Tell me a bit about the school's history.
The sages trace their days to a generation after 5 wives, when the first settlers moved west. The Vellum Citadel began as a scholastic retreat, slowly blossoming into the finest library in the continent across the generations. The centuries fly by, and suddenly, the Vellum Citadel is the definitive archive in the tiers. The sages branched out into carrying missives for wealthy clients, training noble children to read. The peasants may have feared us, but we remained useful enough to the kings and queens of the tiers to avoid war. When Kairos came to the tiers, that's when our hubris came back to haunt us. The elder sages, the other elder sages, not I, believed our spellcraft was enough to ward off any siege. Well, we know how that turned out.
What sort of sigils do the sages practice?
Traditionally, we use magic only so that we may observe and archive. So that means magic of concealment and protection. But, in truth, we have amassed a great wealth of knowledge. Before the Vellum Citadel fell, any given subject of magic had at least one sage practicing it.
So you're admitting you had at least one agent of yours studying the magic of the Tidecasters?
Well, I mean, if such information had fallen into our hands generations ago, we'd be fools not to...
Not to suckle off that ill-gotten teat of knowledge? Filthy word whores of the worst degree. The Edict of Fire wasn't half of what you deserved.
I can see this conversation isn't going to be very constructive places. Both of you drop it.
What would you like to know?
Let's speak of something else. That's all.
Will do.
Alright, that's everyone. Let's get a check at our favor. Scarlet Fury. It's a passive I get. Nice. I have very little favor. Very little favor. Not a lot of wrath. Bronze Brotherhood. I killed some Bronze Brotherhood soldiers. They're not happy. Venging Guard. They love me. Very little wrath. Lethian's Crossing. I got some favor. Lantry loves me. Barrack, Love and Fear. Reverse, Love and Fear. Ebb just love. Graven Ash. They're like, meh. You don't like me. Spell creation. Restoring touch. Stirring visions. Investigate the spires. Whatever you did to Essential and Avenging Null has given you the power to interact with the spires. Before you ascended the spire, you had a vision when the edict broke. Understanding this vision might help you better grasp this new power you have acquired. You had a vision of the spires scattered across the tiers, and you could feel the connection between them and the spire you claimed at Vendrian's Well. Gather more information about these mysterious structures and seek them out wherever possible. You have gained access to Haven. The region's spire is attached to the old walls. Spire. Mysterious device. The ancient device perched atop the mountain spire in Vendrian's Well is the product of a forgotten age. Unclear whether it once had a function or if it can be used again. Resting at the spire grants a bonus to all skills. Revos, a merchant with a motley collection of items with unarmed attacks, parry, dodge, subterfuge. Any Mm-hmm. Two hand. Okay, so I have 3 more. I don't need this one. Oof, actually I probably should. One hand. 1, 2, dual wield parry dodge. 1, 2. Oh. We'll come back to that. We don't need these. We'll leave it at these for now.
On it.
Alright, let's go down.